It ain't the left side or the right side, then it must be the fin side. It ain't the left side.
Thank you, Solo D. Welcome to another episode of On the Fin Side here with Kat and Paul. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Spreaker, iTunes, YouTube, iHeartRadio, and on Spotify. Check out our merch store on thefinside.threadless.com. We're joined here by James Johnson from the Jacksonville Jaguars USA Today Wire, and we appreciate having him on to give us some insight here into the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Dolphins play the Jaguars this Sunday at noon Central, 1 p.m. Eastern Time. The Dolphins 7-7, the Jaguars 4-10 this year. We don't really know a lot of our listeners don't know a whole heck of a lot on a deep dive with the Jaguars, so this is what this segment is all about. James, thanks for joining us here.
Thanks for having me, guys. Appreciate the opportunity.
You bet. And you can follow James on Twitter at sportsgrind_Don. That's sportsgrind_Don. So, James, taking a look at the Jaguars this year, you know, I don't have to tell you they got off to a 3-1 start, and now they're a 4-10 football team. There have been a lot of things, a lot of injuries along the way. You know, taking a look at them, what do you think the Jaguars are trying to accomplish here the rest of the year?
Simply put, what they are trying to accomplish, especially on offense, basically they are trying to find out who are their playmakers going forward. As you said, they've suffered a lot of injuries, most notably on the offensive line. They have three starters, and that would be Brandon Linder, Cam Robinson, and Andrew Norwell. I had a brain fart. Yeah, I had a brain fart there. But those three are on IR, and, you know, they basically have a makeshift unit. And what they basically need to do as of the next two games is find out which guys on that makeshift unit are worth keeping as number twos, because basically the whole line is their backup unit at this point. So you have guys like Eric Flowers, who you guys are familiar with, went to the University of Miami, former first-round pick, went to the New York Giants, spent time with Tom Coughlin up in New York. He's a guy that, you know, they may be eyeing to see if he'll be a serviceable number two left tackle behind Cam Robinson. And then you have some other guys like Josh Wells, who was just brought off of IR this week, or last week, should I say. And he's a guy that, you know, they may be eyeing to see, like, if he's worth keeping further in the future as their swing tackle. They had him a few years now. And the same applies for the rest of their guys in the backup role, like Patrick Omameh and Tyler Shatley. So that'll be most important in the with the offensive line. In terms of the receivers, you know, they need to see what they have more out of Dede Westbrook, who has been phenomenal this season, granted the circumstances. And basically, you know, they I guess they have to see if he's more along the lines of a number one or number two guy, because aside from him, they haven't really got any production out of the receiver spot. And then lastly, at running back, they need to see what they have behind Leonard Fournette. A guy that I'm going to be watching is Williams. His last name
David Williams.
David Williams, yes. I'm sorry, I'm slipping up today. David Williams,
you're good.
They added him from the Broncos practice squad not too long ago. He's a guy that had a very good game last week. He actually outrushed Leonard Fournette. And he's a guy that, you know, he has the upside because he is a rookie. And he's a guy that they can keep at a low cap figure next year, as opposed to, you know, like a TJ Yeldon who's on his last year. And, you know, Carlos Hyde, who they spent the first round pick on this year, but hasn't been very productive. And would be a very hefty cap figure for them next year. So they got to see what they have in the young buck and see if they can find a number two behind Fournette.
And, James, let's stick on that. I understand Leonard Fournette has been practicing this week. Do you see him being the bell cow again this week, or do you see those snaps being distributed a little bit more evenly at running back?
Yeah, I can see him definitely being a bell cow guy. Then again, he was upset last week. It was a span, I want to say the whole third quarter, that he didn't see a snap on the field and didn't get a touch or a carry, if you will. So he was upset about that, needless to say, even though he did a good job of not expressing that But that being said, they have to have a 100-yard game out of him to win this game. So you would expect him to maybe see a lot of touches. But at the same time, as I said with Williams, they do also need to see what they have behind Fournette, because they're coming up to a point where they're going to have an overhaul at the running back position. And Williams is a guy especially that could be a number 2 behind Fournette in the future.
You bet. And at the quarterback spot, they made a change a few weeks ago. Cody Kessler is the starting quarterback, not Blake Bortles. A massive turnaround from last year when, well, I'm not going to say Bortles led them to the AFC Championship, but was the quarterback when they were in the AFC title game. Kessler had 57 yards passing last week only against the Redskins. Obviously, you've lost both your tight ends for the year. 4 out of the 5 offensive linemen are not going to play in this game. What is the impression so far on Kessler? Is it the feeling he's a career backup, or that his lack of performance is because of the parts around him?
Yeah, he's definitely a career backup, and I'm sure most Jags fans would agree that, he certainly isn't their future starter. Maybe he can prove to be their future backup in the next 2 games as of yet, but he hasn't really shown that right now. And I mean, a lot of it, you can't blame. It's a lot of things wrong with this offense, and you can't necessarily blame him for it. As you said, the offensive line is down 3 starters and 4 if you include Jeremy Parnell, who's on the injury report this week. And basically, they haven't blocked well for him. And not only that, though, it's been times where, he's feeling the pressure earlier than he should, and that's because, they're allowing a lot of pressure, and he's dipping his head and taking the ball down too soon. So, he's a guy that hasn't really shown much. I mean, yes, he does offer more than Blake Bortles in terms of, touch and accuracy when he can drop back in the pocket and throw the ball. But at the same time, the pressure has really gotten to him. In terms of what they've allowed. He's been hit over 20 times since becoming the starter week 13. And he is a guy that I think, these 2 games are going to be important for him to show that he can at least be a serviceable backup for the Jags or another team for that matter.
Jay, looking on the defensive side of the ball, obviously this is the unit that took the Jaguars to the AFC title game last year. And a lot of those pieces still remain in place. I mean, I think the common misperception is that the Jaguars' defense have taken a huge step back from last year. But I'm looking at their stats. I mean, they're 6th overall in total defense. The quarterback rating that they've allowed to opposing quarterbacks is 4th best in the league. They're okay against the run, and they still have their stars in Calais Campbell, Jalen Ramsey, Miles Jack, everything. So, having said that, how does this defense for the 2018 Jaguars stack up against last year's?
Well, I think the biggest difference with this defense as opposed to last year is they put up an astronomical amount of sacks, as well as they put up an astronomical amount of turnovers as well. This year, the turnover margin is way worse. Right now, as of today, they are -12 in terms of the turnover margin. Mm-hmm. Last year, they finished the regular season almost on the opposite end of that. They were +10. They were a top 5 group in that category. And needless to say, that helped out the offense a lot because they were getting a lot of fumbles, and a lot of which were pick sixes and, a lot of just turnovers that helped the game turn the tide of the games that they were in last year. This year, they haven't had that. And also, you did hit the nail on the head. They still are a good defensive unit. Nonetheless, they aren't sacking the quarterback as much as they were before, but they are getting good pressure on the quarterback. So that hasn't really been a glaring issue, allowing, teams to really carve them up from the pocket. But nonetheless, they are a group that they aren't, I won't say they are a bad group, but they are certainly not what they were or in that elite caliber that they were last year.
So looking at the matchups now, what do you think the Jaguars have to do on either offense or defense to defeat the Dolphins this game?
Definitely. On offense, they definitely have to get Leonard Fournette going. He hasn't been himself since he's come back from, his injury and suspension. And that's probably because, of his, lack of time on the field. So that being said, he hasn't looked like himself. At times he's missing holes. He's not shooting gap quick enough, and he even admitted that, he could be in better shape, so to speak. So that being said, he has to have a 100-yard game. He has to get back to his old dominant self for the Jaguars to win, and he must amass 100 yards and amass more than 4 yards per carry, because it hasn't been pretty for him as of late. So I think that's the biggest key factor. And they also, they need to lean on D.D. Westbrook's ability after the catch, because, as I've said, they don't really have a lot of time to sit back in the pocket and throw the ball with the condition of the offensive line. So those would be the two key elements that I would lean on to win this game.
And finally, Jay, what is your prediction for this Sunday?
My personal prediction, I actually told Antoine this, who we spoke on before we went on the air, because we did a Q&A. But I'm going to go with a score of 17-14, and that's in favor of the Dolphins. That being said, I do think the Jaguars defense, if they don't get out-schemed, because that's been an issue this year with defensive coordinator Todd Wash. Sometimes the savvy offensive coordinators like Adam Gase can out-scheme him, and it's been an issue here and there, like sporadically throughout the season. So if he doesn't get out-schemed by Todd Wash, the defense, of course, will keep it close. I don't think the Dolphins will get more than 20 points in this game if they don't get out-schemed. And that being said, though, I don't think the Jaguars have the offensive firepower to beat the Dolphins if they can get more than 2 touchdowns and a couple of field goals, because, as I said, the offensive line isn't in the best state. It's a bunch of makeshift guys there. Leonard Fournette hasn't had his best year, and the issues with Cody Kessler, of course, that we've already mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the line on this game, the over-under is 38 points. So Vegas certainly agrees with that type of prediction right there, 17-14. Mm-hmm. And I think it's pretty safe to say in this that the team that does run the ball more effectively and wins the turnover battle is going to win the game, because I don't see the Dolphins throwing the ball all over the yard. I don't see the Jaguars doing that either. So that's, I think, where the game is going to come down to. Jay, I appreciate you joining us here tonight to give us some insight on the Jacksonville Jaguars. He is an editor for the USA Today for the Jaguars, their Jaguars Wire, and you can also follow him on Twitter at sportsgrind_Don. Be sure to go over there and give him a follow. He has great Jaguars content throughout the year. A lot of good insight if you're looking to refresh yourself on this Jaguars-Dolphins matchup too. And that will do it for our breakdown of the Jaguars sideline. You can follow Paul and I on Facebook, Twitter, Spreaker, iTunes, YouTube, iHeartRadio, and on Spotify. And if it's not on the right side and it's not on the left side, it is on the fin side. Solo D, take us home.
It ain't the left side or the right side, then it must be the fin side. It ain't the left side or the right side, then it must be the fin side. Listen, Dolphins fans across the land all tuning in to see what